They said she was cursed. Hollow, a queen without legacy. For 200 years, she ruled from a throne built on silence and shame, while the court whispered behind velvet curtains that her wound was as cold as her immortal blood. They never knew the truth, that no vampire had ever created life, that their entire race was born from theft, not creation, until the night a mortal man, chained and bleeding, was dragged into her castle, and everything the kingdom believed shattered like ancient glass. Queen Seraphine knocked her and sat motionless on the obsidian seat her ancestors had carved 3 centuries ago, her pale fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm against the armrest. The sound echoed to the vaulted chamber like a heartbeat. Ironic, considering she hadn't possessed one in over 200 years. Beyond the stained glass windows, the moon hung low and swollen, casting fractured light across the marble floor. Red, blue, gold. The colors bled together like a bruise. She could hear them even now. The whispers. They slithered to the corridors like smoke, curling beneath doorways, settling into the cracks of the palace walls. The nobles thought themselves careful, thought their voices too soft to reach her supernatural hearing. They were wrong. Still no heir, Lady Constance had murmured yesterday, her fan snapping shut with the precision of a guillotine. 2 centuries on the throne, and her bloodline dies with her. Perhaps it's a mercy, Lord Victor had replied, his laughter thin as winter ice. What kind of queen cannot even fulfill the most basic function of royalty? Seraphine's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She rose from the throne, her gown, black silk embroidered with silver roses, whispering against the stone as she descended the steps. Her reflection flickered in the polished floor, tall, elegant, untouchable, a face that hadn't aged since 1824. Skin like moonlight, eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. Beautiful, powerful, barren. The word tasted like ash in a mouth that no longer needed food. She moved through the castle like a ghost haunting her own life, passing portraits of her predecessors, all of them surrounded by painted children, symbolic heirs who'd never actually existed. The lie was old, ancient, as old as vampirism itself. Because here was the truth the court refused to acknowledge. No vampire had ever conceived a child. Not naturally, not through their own bodies. Every heir, throughout history, had been a human turned in infancy or childhood, adopted into the bloodline through the ritual of transformation. Every royal succession was built on theater and blood magic, never biology. The humans didn't know. Most young vampires didn't know. But the old ones, the ones who lived long enough to watch centuries collapse into dust, they knew, and they blamed her anyway. Seraphine paused before a window overlooking the courtyard. Below, torches flickered like trapped stars. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements mechanical, purposeful. Beyond the castle walls, the kingdom of Valmoras stretched into darkness. Villages tucked into valleys, forests thick with things that hunted in shadow, mountains that pierced the sky like broken teeth. Her kingdom, her burden. The queen is weak, she'd heard Duke Alaric say last month, his voice dripping with contempt. A ruler without legacy is no ruler at all. Perhaps it's time for a change. Treason dressed in politeness. She'd done nothing, said nothing, because what could she say? That the entire foundation of vampire nobility was a lie? That their precious bloodlines were fiction, stitched together with stolen humans and elaborate deception? They'd tear her apart. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Sharp, efficient. Enter, Seraphine commanded, not turning from a window. The door opened. She caught the reflection in the glass. Captain Isidore, head of her royal guard, his face gray beneath his ceremonial helmet. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "The prisoner has arrived." Prisoner? She turned slowly, one eyebrow arched. From the border skirmish 3 nights ago. A human soldier. The council requested he be brought here for interrogation. The way he said interrogation suggested something far less civilized. Seraphine studied him. Isidore was old by vampire standards, nearly 400 years, and loyal to a fault. But even he couldn't entirely hide the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. And what does the council intend to learn from one human soldier? Troop movements, supply routes, A pause. They believe his knowledge could be valuable. I see. She moved toward him, her steps soundless. And where is this prisoner now? The lower dungeons, your majesty, awaiting your orders. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Then take me to him. Isidore blinked. Majesty, you heard me, but protocol suggests... Protocol, she interrupted softly, has never prevented my court from whispering that I'm unfit to rule. If they want this prisoner interrogated, I'll do it myself. Something shifted in Isidore's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest hint of approval. He bowed. As you command. The dungeons were everything the throne room was not. Crude, damp, honest in their brutality. Seraphine descended the spiral staircase, one hand trailing along the stone wall, feeling the moisture seep through the cold surface. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the smell of earth and old blood and human fear. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting wild shadows that danced like demons. At the bottom, a narrow corridor stretched before her, lined with cells on either side. Most were empty. Valmerath didn't take many prisoners, preferring to feed immediately or kill outright. But at the far end, light spilled from one occupied cell. 2 guards stood outside, straightening when they saw her approach. Your Majesty. They bowed in unison, fists over hearts. She nodded once. Open it. The lock clicked. The door swung inward, and Seraphine stepped into the cell. The prisoner sat against the far wall, wrists chained to iron rings embedded in the stone. His head was bowed, dark hair falling forward, obscuring his face. He wore the remnant of a soldier's uniform, torn, blood-stained, barely recognizable. His breathing was labored but steady. He'd been beaten. Recently. Seraphine stood in the doorway, studying him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen. Human, male, late 20s, perhaps 30. Broad shoulders despite obvious malnourishment. Skin a deep, rich brown that caught the torchlight like polished wood. Look at me, she said. For a moment he didn't move. Then, slowly he raised his head, and their eyes met. Something happened in that instant. Something Seraphine couldn't name. A pulse of recognition that defied logic. A current of energy that ran through the air between like electricity before a storm. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held no fear. That was what struck her most forcefully. Every human who'd ever been dragged into her presence had reeked of terror, their hearts hammering so loudly she could taste it. But this man looked at her with something closer to curiosity. Assessment. What's your name? She asked. He said nothing. I asked you a question. Still silence, but his gaze never wavered. Seraphine took a step closer. Then another. The cell was small. Within 3 strides, she stood directly before him, close enough to see the cut on his cheekbone, the bruise darkening his jaw, the blood dried at the corner of his mouth. You understand me, she observed. I can see in your eyes. So why won't you speak? His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so bitter. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, but steady. Because anything I say will be used to torture my comrades. So I decided to say nothing at all. An accent she couldn't quite place. Educated speech despite the soldier's uniform. Loyal, Seraphine murmured. Admirable. Foolish. Is there a difference? Usually. She circled him slowly, her gown whispering against the stone floor. He tracked her movement, but didn't turn his head, didn't strain against his chains. Conserving energy. Smart. They'll kill you, she said matter-of-factly. The council. They'll drain you slowly, make you watch as they tear apart every thought in your mind, extract every secret you're trying to protect. And then, when there's nothing left but screaming, they'll discard what remains. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. What I want is irrelevant. You're the queen. Yes. Then how can your wants be irrelevant? Seraphine stopped circling. She stood before him again, studying his face with an intensity that would have made most men flinch. He didn't. What's your name? She asked again, softer this time. A long pause. Then, Marcus. Marcus. She tasted the name, rolled it around her mouth like wine. No family name? Not one I claim. Why were you at the border? Escorting refugees. Refugees from what? Your kind. Truth. Plain and unvarnished. No attempt to soften it. No plea for mercy disguised as explanation. Seraphine felt something stir in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in decades. Interest. Real, genuine interest. You hate vampires, she said. It wasn't a question. I hate what vampires do to humans. There's a difference. Is there? You tell me. You're the one standing here talking instead of feeding. A smile goes across her lips despite herself. Careful. It won't save you. Nothing will save me. Marcus met her eyes again. But I'd rather die speaking truth than live begging for scraps of mercy from monsters. The word hung in the air between them. Monsters. She should have been offended. Should have struck him, reminded him of his place, demonstrated the vast gulf of power separating them. Instead, she found herself asking, "Do you have family, Marcus?" His expression shuddered. "No. Friends. Dead. Nothing to lose, then. Everyone has something to lose, Your Majesty, even if it's just the last shred of who they are." Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned toward the door, her decision made. "Captain," she called. Isidore appeared immediately. "Yes, Majesty?" "Have this prisoner moved to the east wing, the secure chambers." Confusion flickered across Isidore's face. "To the east wing? But that's... I know what it is." She glanced back at Marcus, who watched her with that same unnerving calm. "I'm not done with him yet." "Your Majesty," Isidore began carefully, "the council expects." "The council can wait." She swept past him into the corridor. "I want him fed, cleaned, and given proper quarters. Post guards if it makes you feel better. But he's not to be harmed. Is that understood?" "Yes, Majesty." Isidore's voice was tight with barely concealed confusion, but he bowed. "As you command." Seraphine didn't look back as she ascended the stairs, but she could feel Marcus's gaze burning into her spine like a brand. Something had shifted tonight, something she couldn't yet name. But for the first time in 200 years, Queen Seraphine Nocturne felt a faint, dangerous stirring of possibility. 3 days passed before she visited him again. The east wing of the castle had been her private sanctuary once, before the Way of the Crown had turned every moment into performance. Now it stood mostly empty, a ghost of happier decades when she'd still believed immortality might be a gift rather than a sentence. Marcus's chambers were at the end of a long corridor lined with faded tapestries, depicting battles that no longer mattered. 2 guards flanked the door, straightening when she approached. "Leave us," she commanded. They exchanged glances. "Your Majesty, protocol." "Now." They bowed and retreated, their footsteps echoing down the hallway until silence swallowed them whole. Seraphine stood alone before the door, her hand resting on the iron handle. She could hear movement inside, footsteps, the rustle of fabric, the soft exhalation of breath. Alive, still alive. She pushed the door open. Marcus stood by the window, bathed in moonlight, looking out over the kingdom that held him captive. He'd been given clean clothes, simple but well-made, dark trousers, and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His wounds had been tended. The cut on his cheek was healing, the bruises fading to yellow-green. He turned when she entered, and once again their eyes met with that strange, electric intensity. "Your Majesty," he said. Not quite mockery, not quite respect. "You're looking better. Your hospitality is unexpected." "Is it?" She closed the door behind her, moving into the room with the fluid grace of a predator. "You expected torture. Death, not clean sheets and hot meals. I still expect those things. Just later." Seraphine almost smiled. "Honest. It's all I have left." She studied him in the moonlight, this human who refused a break, who looked at her with clear eyes and steady hands. In 2 centuries, she'd seen thousands of humans, fed on hundreds, but none had ever made her feel like this, like something dormant was waking after a long, cold sleep. Why did you really come to the board of Marcus? She asked quietly. The truth this time. He was silent for a long moment. Then, my sister. Your sister? She was taken. 3 months ago. Vampire raiders hit our village, killed most of the men, took the women and children. His voice was steady, but Seraphine could hear the rage beneath it, carefully controlled. I tracked them to your border, tried to get her back. And I failed. The words were simple, brutal. They killed her in front of me, made me watch, then beat me half to death and threw me in a cell. Seraphine felt something twist in her chest. Guilt? Empathy? Emotion she thought calcified by centuries of necessary cruelty. I'm sorry, she said. Marcus laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You're sorry? You're their queen. You let this happen. Your people murder and steal and destroy, and you sit on your throne and do nothing. You think I don't know? The words came out sharper than she intended. You think I don't see what my kind does to yours? Then why don't you stop it? Because... She moved closer, her composure cracking. Because if I show weakness, if I reveal that I care about human lives, they'll remove me. The council, the nobles, the old ones who've forgotten what it means to be anything but monsters. They'll tear me apart and put someone worse in my place. Someone who won't even pretend to have mercy. So you sacrifice humans to keep your power. I sacrifice some to save many. Seraphine's hands clench into fists. You think you understand this world, but you don't. You see evil and think it's simple, but it's not. It's complicated and old and so deeply rooted that pulling out would destroy everything. Maybe everything deserves to be destroyed. They stood facing each other in the moonlight, two beings separated by death and species and centuries of bloodshed, and yet somehow connected by a thread neither could name. Why are you really here? Marcus asked finally. Why save me? Why move me to nice rooms and heal my wounds? What do you want from me? Seraphine opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, because she didn't know. Or rather, she knew but couldn't say it aloud, that she was lonely, that 200 years of ruling had hollowed her out until she was nothing but a beautiful shell, performing the role of queen while dying inside, that every insult, every whisper about her infertility, every pitying glance from nobles who thought she was broken, it carved away pieces of her until she barely recognized herself. And then this human had looked at her with eyes that saw past the crown, past the fangs, past the centuries of carefully constructed lies. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd felt seen. I don't know, she said finally. Truthfully, I don't know what I want from you. I just know that when I look at you, something feels different. Marcus studied her face. Different how? Alive. The word hung between them, impossible and true. You're a vampire, he said slowly. You're not alive. No. Seraphine moved to the window, standing beside him, looking out at the kingdom she ruled but had never truly belonged to. No, I'm not. But for 200 years, I haven't felt alive either. Until 3 days ago, when a human prisoner looked at me like I was something more than a monster. I never said you weren't a monster. I know. She turned to face him. But you looked at me like I might also be something else. Like I might be complicated. Real. And I haven't felt real in so long I've forgotten what it was like. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then, what happens now? I don't know that either. The council will want me dead. Yes. And you'll have to give me to them eventually or face rebellion. Probably. So this is temporary. A brief reprieve before the inevitable. Seraphine felt that twist in her chest again. Sharper this time. Unless what? She turned to him fully, an idea forming, dangerous, reckless, but shimmering with possibility. Unless I find a way to make you valuable. Too valuable to kill. I'm just a human soldier. What value could I possibly have to vampire nobility? Seraphine looked at him, really looked at him, at the strength in his frame, despite weeks of captivity, at the intelligence in his eyes, at the vitality that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. And she remembered something, a fragment of knowledge from her human life, before the transformation, Something her grandmother had whispered about fertility and bloodlines and the old magic that existed before vampires claimed dominion over the night. Life calls to life. I have an idea, she said slowly, but it's insane, dangerous. If I'm wrong, we both die. We're probably going to die anyway. True. She smiled despite herself. Are you willing to take a chance on something impossible? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand, scarred, calloused, utterly human. Show me this impossible thing, your majesty. And Seraphine, queen of Valmarath, took the hand of a mortal man and felt, for the first time in 2 centuries, the flutter of something that might have been hope. It existed in the deepest level of the eastern tower, carved into living rock, its walls lined with books and scrolls that predated written language. Some were bound in leather that had never come from any earthly animal. Others were etched on stone tablets in symbols that hurt to look at directly. This was where the oldest knowledge slept, the dangerous knowledge. Seraphine led Marcus through corridors lit only by phosphorescent moss that grew in patches along the ceiling, casting everything in a sickly green glow. His footsteps echoed behind hers, steady and unafraid. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere no one has been in over a century. Somewhere I'm not technically allowed to go without council approval. Breaking your own rules already? They're not my rules. They're chains disguised as protocol." She paused before a door made of black iron, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. "And I'm tired of wearing chains." She pressed her palm against the door. It recognized her blood, her lineage, and swung open with a groan that sounded almost like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the weight of forgotten time. The library stretched before them, impossibly vast, shelves rising 3 stories high and disappearing into shadow. Moonlight filtered through narrow windows set high in the walls, creating columns of pale illumination that looked like frozen waterfalls. Marcus whistled low. "This is the archive of before," Seraphine finished, "where my ancestors stored everything they learned about the transformation, about what we lost when we became vampires, about what we tried and failed to regain." She moved deeper into the library, running her fingers along spines of books so old they crumbled at her touch. Marcus followed, his eyes wide, taking an impossible collection. "You said you had an idea," he prompted. "Something about making me valuable." "Not just valuable." Seraphine stopped before a section of the library where the books were bound in white leather and sealed with silver clasps. "Essential. But first, I need to show you something. Something my kind has hidden for millennia." She pulled down a massive tome, its cover embossed with symbols that predated vampirism itself. The book fell open to a page she'd studied obsessively during her first years as queen, when the court's whispers about her infertility had driven her to desperate research. The page was illuminated with images painted in gold and crimson, a vampire and a human intertwined, surrounded by symbols of life and death. "Do you know why vampires take human lovers?" she asked. Marcus frowned. "Feeding?" "Sometimes, but historically." She traced the illumination with one pale finger. "We take human lovers because we remember, deep in our dead hearts, we remember what it was like to be warm, to have blood that moved without magic compelling it, to be alive. And there's an old legend, older than the council, older than the kingdoms. It says that vampires didn't always reproduce by turning humans, that once, long ago, we could create life naturally. But the transformation killed that ability, killed everything that made biological life possible. If that's true, why doesn't anyone know? Because admitting it would mean admitting that vampires are evolutionary dead ends. Parasites, creatures that can only steal life, never create it." Seraphine's voice was tight. "The old ones buried the knowledge, built elaborate lies about bloodlines and heritage, convinced everyone that our inability to conceive was individual failure, not species-wide extinction." Marcus stared at the page. "So every vampire, every single one, for over 3,000 years, not one vampire has naturally conceived a child. Then what's your idea?" Seraphine turned to face him fully. "The legend doesn't end there. It says that under specific circumstances, rare, almost impossible circumstances, a vampire could conceive with a human. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus blinked. You're joking. I've never been more serious. That's insane. I told you it was. Even if it were true, what makes you think it would work? What makes you think we could? He stopped, the implications catching up with him. Seraphine watched understanding dawn across his face. The legend is specific. It requires 3 things: a vampire of royal blood, a human with strong vitality, what the ancients called life force, and a genuine connection, not just physical, something deeper. A genuine connection, Marcus repeated slowly, between a vampire queen and her human prisoner. When you looked at me in that cell, I felt something I haven't felt in 200 years. A pulse of something, life recognizing life, even through death. She moved closer to him. And I think you felt it too. He didn't deny it. This is insane, he said again, but his voice was softer now. You're talking about, what? Try and conceive a child? A hybrid? I'm talking about survival. Mine and yours. Seraphine's eyes blazed with intensity. If I can bear children, real children, not turn humans, it would change everything. The court couldn't call me weak or infertile. The council couldn't threaten rebellion. And you, she reached out, her fingers hovering just above his hand. You would become the most valuable human in vampire history. Irreplaceable, untouchable, or we'd both be executed for heresy. Possibly. Probably. Are you afraid? Marcus met her gaze. Terrified. But I've been terrified since the moment your kind took my sister. At least this terror comes with purpose. Seraphine felt something loosen in her chest. Then you'll do it? I have conditions. Of course you do. If this works, if we actually create children, they're raised as equals, not as vampires, not as humans, but as something new, something better than what either of our species has become. Agreed. And you work to change the laws, to protect humans in your territory, to make your kind less monstrous. I'll try. I can't promise success. Try is enough. They stood facing each other in the dusty library, surrounded by the weight of dead knowledge and impossible legends, and Seraphine realized they were negotiating the terms of revolution disguised as reproduction. There's something else, she said quietly, something the legend warns about. What? If this works, if we conceive, the pregnancy will be dangerous. Vampire bodies aren't designed for life. My body will fight the growth. Try to consume it like food. I'll have to be constantly fed, constantly maintained. And even then, she swallowed. Even then, there's no guarantee I'll survive. And you're willing to risk that? I've been dead for 200 years, Marcus. Actually, dying doesn't scare me nearly as much as continuing to exist without purpose. He studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm against her cold palm, alive in a way she'd forgotten warmth could feel. When do we start? Tonight, Seraphine said, before I lose my nerve, before the council discovers what I'm planning, before reality has time to convince us we're insane. She led him from the library, through corridors that seemed to hold their breath, up winding stairs to a chamber that had been sealed since her transformation. Her old room, her human room. It smelled of lavender and dust and memories that no longer fit in her undead mind. Why here? Marcus asked. Because this is the only place in the castle where I still remember what it was like to be alive. She turned to face him, vulnerability showing through her regal facade. And if we're going to create life, I need to remember. Marcus moved closer, and Seraphine realized she was trembling, an impossibility for her kind, yet undeniable. Are you afraid? He asked, echoing her earlier question. Terrified, she admitted, but I think that means we're doing something right. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. We're definitely insane. Spectacularly. And then they were kissing, and Seraphine felt something crack inside her chest where her heart used to beat. Warmth flooded through her dead veins, foreign and familiar, like remembering a language she'd forgotten she knew. Marcus's hands were gentle despite their strength, tracing the line of her jaw, tangling in her silver-white hair. She pulled him closer, desperate to feel more of that heat, more of that impossible aliveness. They made love slowly, tenderly, as the moon tracked across the sky and shadows danced on the walls. And with each touch, each breath, each moment of connection, Seraphine felt something stirring deep inside her, something that had been dormant for centuries. Life calling to life. When it was over, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and hope, and Seraphine pressed her palm against her stomach, wondering if the impossible had just become possible. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice drowsy. "Now!" Seraphine looked up at the ceiling, at the stars visible through the high windows. "Now we wait, and hope, and prepare for the storm that's coming when the court finds out. How long before we know? For humans, weeks. For vampires attempting the impossible." She smiled faintly. "I have no idea." Marcus's arm tightened around her waist. "We'll figure out." And lying there in the moonlight, wrapped in the warmth of a human, who should have been her enemy, Queen Seraphine knocked her and allowed herself to believe him. The first sign came 3 weeks later. Seraphine woke, actually woke, which was wrong in itself, because vampires didn't sleep, with a sensation she couldn't immediately identify. It took her several moments to recognize it as hunger, not bloodlust, actual hunger. She sat up in bed, one hand pressed to her stomach, feeling something that couldn't possibly be real, warmth. Faint, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there. Marcus stirred beside her. They'd been sharing her chambers in secret. The guard sworn to silence with threats and bribes. "What's wrong?" "I'm hungry." "So feed." He stopped, seeing her face. "Not for blood." "No." Her hand trembled against her stomach. "For food. Real food. I haven't needed to eat in 200 years, and suddenly I'm starving." They stared at each other as understanding crashed over them like a wave. "It worked," Marcus whispered. Seraphine couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only sit there with her hand on her stomach, feeling that impossible warmth, that undeniable pulse of something growing where nothing should be able to grow. Life, against all odds, against every law of vampire biology, against 3,000 years of absolute certainty. "Life, we need to be careful," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "If the council finds out, they'll kill us both." "I know." Seraphine forced herself to think past the shock, past the sudden, overwhelming joy. "We need time. Time for the pregnancy to develop enough that destroying it would be impossible. Time to build alliances. Time to prepare. How much time do we have?" "I don't know. Human pregnancies take 9 months, but this..." She pressed harder against her stomach, as if she could feel the tiny spark of life through skin and muscle. "This is something else entirely." The hunger came again, sharp and insistent. Seraphine gasped, doubling over. Marcus was beside her immediately, steadying her. "What do you need?" "Food. Actual food." She looked up at him, and for the first time since her transformation, she felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't even remember what food tastes like." He kissed her forehead, gentle and grounding. "Then let's remember together." The changes came quickly after that. Within days, Seraphine's body was doing things that should have been impossible. Her skin, which had been corpse pale for 2 centuries, developed a faint hint of warmth and color. Her eyes, silver gray since transformation, began showing flecks of blue they'd been in her human life. And her appetite was insatiable. She ate constantly, bread and cheese and fruit, roasted meat and rich stews, things she'd forgotten existed. Marcus brought her meals in secret, and she devoured them like a starving woman, which in a way, she was. The council noticed, of course. "You seem different, Your Majesty," Duke Alaric said during assembly 2 months after that first night with Marcus. His eyes were sharp, calculating, more vibrant. "Have you been feeding well?" "Very well, thank you." Seraphine kept her voice level, her hands resting on the arms of her throne to hide their trembling. Lady Constance leaned forward, her fan snapping open. "And the human prisoner? The one you moved to the East Wing?" Surely he's outlived his usefulness. On the contrary, Seraphine met her gaze steadily. He's proven quite valuable. I've decided to keep him. A murmur ran through the council chamber. Lord Victor's eyebrows rose. Keep him? In what capacity? That's my concern, not yours. Everything you do is our concern, Your Majesty. Duke Alaric's voice was soft, dangerous. You bear the weight of the kingdom. Your decisions affect us all. Then trust that I'm making the right decisions. Trust. Lady Constance's laugh was like breaking glass. You asked for trust while hiding yourself away with a human prisoner, emerging looking more alive than you have in decades? What exactly are we supposed to think? Seraphine felt Marcus's presence in the shadows behind her throne. He'd insisted on attending the council meeting, refused to let her face them alone. His silent support gave her strength. Think what you like, she said coolly. But remember this, I am your queen, and I don't answer to you. Duke Alaric stood slowly. Not yet, perhaps, but queens who lose the confidence of their council rarely remain queens for long. The threat hung in the air like poison. Seraphine rose from her throne, drawing herself to her full height. Every inch the immortal ruler. Is that a challenge, Duke? It's an observation. Then observe this. I have ruled Valmorath for 200 years. I have survived wars, plagues, and rebellions. I have maintained peace when lesser rulers would have collapsed into chaos. She descended the steps, moving toward him with predatory grace. And I will not be intimidated by a duke who mistakes politics for power. Duke Alaric held her gaze for a long moment. Then he bowed, shallow, perfunctory, barely respectful. As you say, Your Majesty. But his eyes promised that this wasn't over. That night, safe in her chambers, Seraphine finally let her composure crack. They know something's wrong, she said, pacing before the fireplace. They can sense the change even if they can't identify it. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. How much longer can we hide it? Not long. She pressed both hands to her stomach, which was just beginning to show a slight curve beneath her gowns. At 3 months, I'm already further along than any vampire in history, but I can feel them growing so fast. Too fast. Them? Seraphine stopped pacing. I think there's more than one. Marcus stood. How many? I don't know, but I can feel distinct presences, different heartbeats. She looked at him, wonder and terror mixing in her expression. Marcus, I think we created something unprecedented. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. We'll protect them, whatever it takes. The council will see them as abominations. Then we'll prove them wrong. And if we can't, then we run. Marcus's voice was firm, absolute. We take the children and we run to the farthest corner of the earth, and we raise them free from all of this poison. Seraphine wanted to tell him it was impossible, that there was nowhere they could hide from vampire reach. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce determination there, she found herself believing in impossible things again. I love you, she said suddenly. I don't know what happened, but I do. I love you. Marcus smiled, sad and beautiful. I know. I've loved you since you walked into that cell and looked at me like I was human instead of food. They held each other in the firelight. Two beings from different worlds, bound together by the impossible lives growing between them. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. And in the depths of the castle, Duke Alaric sent messengers to the Old Ones, the ancient vampires who'd survived millennia and remembered when queens could be broken. The storm was coming, in more ways than one. But in her chambers, holding the man she loved, feeling the flutter of impossible life inside her, Queen Seraphine knocked her and allowed herself one more moment of peace before the war began. By the 4th month, Seraphine could no longer hide the changes. Her body, designed for death, was rebelling in its attempt to sustain life. She needed blood constantly, not to feed, but to nourish the growing lives inside her. She needed food in quantities that would have killed a human through overconsumption. She needed warmth, sunlight, things that should have destroyed her. And she was glowing, not metaphorically, literally glowing. Her skin had taken on a faint luminescence, as if the life inside her was radiating outward, transforming death back into something resembling humanity. Her hair, silver white since transformation, was darkening to the pale blonde it had been in life. Her eyes blazed blue-gray, shifting between vampire and human, as if her body couldn't decide which it was anymore. Captain Isidore was the first of the court to confront her directly. He found her in the eastern gardens one afternoon, standing in a shaft of sunlight that should have reduced her to ash. She was wearing a loose gown, one hand resting protectively on her now obvious belly. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "We need to talk." Seraphine didn't turn. About whatever is happening to you." He moved closer, his ancient face creased with concern. "In 400 years, I've never seen a vampire stand in direct sunlight. I've never seen one eat food or show color in their skin or—" He gestured helplessly. "Or look pregnant. And what do you think you're seeing, Captain?" "Something impossible." Finally, she turned to face him. In the sunlight, she looked almost human, beautiful and terrible and utterly unprecedented. "You're right," she said simply. "It is impossible. And yet here I stand." Isidore's eyes dropped to her belly, then back to her face. "How?" "The human, Marcus. But vampires can't. Can't conceive, can't bear children, can't create life." "Yes, I know. I've heard it for 200 years. Seraphine's voice was sharp as broken glass. "But apparently, under the right circumstances, we can. The Council will never accept this. I don't need them to accept it. I need them to survive it long enough to see the children born." "Children?" Isidore's voice cracked. "More than one." Seraphine nodded slowly. "I can feel for distinct heartbeats, for separate lives. Marcus and I created quadruplets, Captain, for hybrid children that shouldn't exist." The old vampire staggered backward, as if she'd struck him. "My God!" "I need to know where you stand, Isidore." Seraphine moved toward him, her hand still protective over her belly. "Because in a few weeks, maybe less, I won't be able to hide this anymore. And when the Council finds out, they'll move against me. I need to know if my most trusted guard will stand with me or against me." Isidore was silent for a long moment, his face a mask of internal conflict. "Then why Marcus? Why a human?" "Because he looked at me like I was real. Because he challenged me to be more than a monster. Because when he touched me, I felt alive for the first time in 2 centuries. Seraphine's voice softened. "And because somehow impossibly, our connection created the one thing vampires have failed to create for 3,000 years. Genuine new life. The old ones will call a heresy. Let them. They'll try to destroy you, to destroy the children. Then they'll have to get through me first." Seraphine's eyes blazed with sudden ferocity. "I have spent 200 years being the queen they wanted. Cold, distant, properly monstrous. But I'm caring for lives that represent hope for both our species. And I will burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone harm them." Isidore studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt. "Then I stand with you, your Majesty, whatever comes." Seraphine felt something break inside her chest. Relief so profound it was almost painful. "Thank you. But you need more than just me." Isidore rose, his expression grave. "You need allies, real ones. And you need them now, before Duke Alaric moves. What do you know? He's been sending messages. To the Ancient Ones in the northern wastes. To Lord Constantine, who rules the Blood Cities. To every vampire old enough and powerful enough to challenge your reign." Isidore's voice was urgent. "He's building a coalition, your Majesty. And when he's ready, he'll come for you. How long? Weeks. Maybe less." Seraphine pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the flutter of movement inside. "For tiny lives, growing stronger every day. Then we move first." The confrontation came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Duke Alaric called an emergency council session, invoking ancient protocols that even the queen couldn't ignore. Seraphine arrived to find the chamber packed with nobles, all of them wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Marcus stood behind her throne, visible for the first time. Let them see him. Let them understand. Duke Alaric rose as she entered, his smile sharp as a blade. Your Majesty, how kind of you to join us. You called a session, Duke. Of course I came. Excellent. He gestured to the assembled nobles. We have concerns, serious concerns about your recent behavior. My behavior has been exemplary. Has it? Lady Constance stood, her fan snapping open like a weapon. You've been hiding away for months, refusing proper audiences, emerging only briefly, looking more human with each appearance. And now you bring your human pet to official council. Marcus is not my pet. He's... Seraphine stopped, making a decision in that instant that would change everything. He's the father of my children. Silence crashed over the chamber, like a physical force. Then chaos. Impossible. She's gone mad. Heresy. Duke Alaric's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Silence. The room stilled, but the air vibrated with shock and rage. Explain yourself, Your Majesty. Duke Alaric's voice was dangerously soft, because what you just claimed violates every law of nature and vampire biology. Seraphine stood, moving to the center of the chamber, and then, deliberately, she loosened her gown, letting it fall away to reveal her swollen belly, obvious and undeniable. The gasps echoed off the stone walls. I am 5 months pregnant, she said clearly, with 4 children, half vampire, half human. The first natural-born vampire offspring in over 3,000 years. Lord Victor found his voice first. It's a trick, some kind of blood magic. It's not magic. Marcus stepped forward, placing one hand protectively on Seraphine's shoulder. It's biology, life recognizing life. Something your kind forgot was possible. You dare speak in this chamber, human? Duke Alaric's eyes blazed red. He speaks because I allow it, Seraphine said coldly. And you will hear him with respect, Duke, or you will be removed. Removed? Alaric laughed, harsh and bitter. You threaten me? You, who have perverted everything sacred about our kind, who have lain with a human and produced abominations? Careful how you speak about my children, Duke. They're not children. They're mistakes. Biological impossibilities that should never have been created. He turned to the assembled nobles. Can't you see? She's gone mad, lost in some fantasy of motherhood, some desperate attempt to prove she's not the failure we all know she is. Seraphine felt rage building inside her, not cold vampire fury, but hot human anger, protective, maternal, fierce. You want to know why I was able to conceive when no vampire has for millennia? She said, her voice ringing through the chamber. Because I remember what you've all forgotten, that we were human once, that we came from life, not death, and that maybe, just maybe, we weren't meant to be parasites forever. Blasphemy! Lady Constance shrieked. Truth! Seraphine shot back. We've told ourselves for centuries that we're superior to humans, that our immortality makes us better. But look at what we become, sterile, stagnant, slowly dying as a species because we can't create, only consume. She moved through the chamber, meeting the eyes of every noble present. These children represent hope, evolution, a bridge between our species. And yes, they're unprecedented and frightening, and they challenge everything you believe. But they're also alive, growing, real, and I will not apologize for creating life in a world obsessed with death. The Council will never accept this, Duke Alaric said flatly. Then the Council can burn. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Duke Alaric smiled slowly. So be it. I call for a vote of no confidence in Queen Seraphine Nocturne on ground of madness, heresy, and crimes against vampire nature. Seconded. Lord Victor said immediately. Thirded. Added Lady Constance. One by one, hands rose around the chamber. Not all of them. Captain Isidore stood firm, and a few younger nobles looked uncertain. But more than half. More than enough. The vote carries, Duke Alaric announced. Queen Seraphine, you are hereby... I reject your vote. Alaric blinked. You can't reject. I'm the queen. I can do whatever I want. Seraphine's voice was steel wrapped in silk, and I reject your attempt to remove me based on the very thing that proves I'm fit to rule. I've done what no vampire's done in 3 millennia. I've created life. That makes me more qualified to lead, not less. It makes you an abomination. Then I'll be an abomination with an army. She turned to Captain Isidore. Send word to the border guards, the city watch, the common vampires who've never had a voice in this council. Tell them their queen is carrying hybrid children who could change the future of both species. Ask them where they stand. Your Majesty, Duke Alaric's voice was dangerous now. Ask them, Seraphine continued, ignoring him, if they want to continue the slow extinction, stealing humans and pretending we're creating bloodlines. Or if they want to try something new, something impossible, something that might actually save us. You're dividing the kingdom. You divided it first when you called this vote. Seraphine met his gaze steadily. I'm just giving people a choice. This is war. No, Duke, this is evolution, and you can either adapt or die with the old world. She turned and walked from the chamber, Marcus at her side, leaving chaos in her wake. Behind them, Duke Alaric's voice rose above the shouting. She's declared herself enemy of the council. Any who support her support heresy. Choose your sides carefully. But Seraphine didn't look back. She walked through the castle corridors with her head high, one hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of 4 tiny heartbeats that represented revolution. What now? Marcus asked quietly. Now we prepare for war. Seraphine looked at him, and despite everything, she smiled. And we pray our children are born before the kingdom tears itself apart. The kingdom split like rotten wood. Within days, vampire society had fractured into 2 factions. Those who saw the hybrid children as abominations that must be destroyed, and those who saw them as hope for a dying species. Duke Alaric controlled the old nobility, the ancient vampires who remembered when humans were nothing but food. But Seraphine held the loyalty of the younger generation, the common vampires who'd grown tired of stagnation. And surprisingly, many of the human populations within Valmaratha's borders, because the humans had heard about the pregnant vampire queen and her human lover, and for the first time in centuries, they dared to hope that maybe the monsters could become something else. Letters arrived at the castle daily, smuggled past Alaric's blockades by brave messengers. We stand with you, your majesty. My daughter was taken by vampires last year. If your children can bridge our worlds, perhaps other children won't be stolen. The old ones call you mad, but madness is trying the same thing for 3,000 years and expecting different results. We're ready for change. I lost my son to the turning. He's not the person he was. But maybe your children can be both. Maybe they can be whole. Seraphine read each letter in her chambers, tears streaming down her face. Another impossibility. Vampires crying. But she wasn't quite vampire anymore, was she? She was becoming something else. Something new. The pregnancy continued accelerating. By the 6th month, she looked ready to give birth. Her body had fully transformed, more human than vampire now, warm and vital and absolutely exhausted. She could barely stand without help. The 4 lives inside her demanded constant nourishment, constant care. Marcus barely left her side, feeding her blood and food in equal measure, holding her when the pain became too much. They're too big, the physician said, one of the few vampires old enough to remember human medicine. Your body can't sustain them much longer. How long? Marcus demanded. Days, maybe a week. And if she gives birth now, the children might survive. The physician looked at Seraphine with something like pity. But she might not. Unacceptable. Marcus's voice was hard. Find another way. There is no other way. This has never been done before. We're writing the rules as we go. That night, holding Marcus in the darkness, Seraphine finally admitted her fear. I might not survive this. Don't say that. It's true. My body is trying to be 2 things at once, and it's tearing itself apart. She pressed his hand to her belly, where the children kicked and moved. So alive it hurt, But even if I don't make it, you have to protect them. Promise me. Seraphine, promise me, Marcus. They'll need someone who remembers what it means to be human. Someone who can teach them that strength doesn't require cruelty, that power doesn't require monstrosity. Marcus's voice broke. I can't lose you. You won't lose me. I'll be in them. In every heartbeat, every breath, every moment they choose compassion over cruelty. She kissed him softly. I'll be there. But she didn't die. 3 days later, as Duke Alaric's forces gathered outside the castle walls and the kingdom teetered on the edge of civil war, Seraphine went into labor, and the impossible became flesh. The birth lasted 18 hours. Seraphine had survived 2 centuries of immortality, but nothing prepared her for this. Pain beyond memory as her body expelled 4 lives that were both vampire and human, death and life made manifest. Marcus held her hand through it all, refusing to leave despite the physician's pleas. I promised I'd be here, he said fiercely. I'm not breaking that promise. The first child came at sunrise, bathing the chamber in golden light that should have burned Seraphine, but felt like blessing. A girl, small, perfect, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes shifting between silver and dark brown. Aurelia, Seraphine whispered. The second came an hour later. Another girl, fierce and alert, with dark curls and commanding presence. Celine, Marcus said in awe. The third was a boy, born in terrifying silence until he gasped and opened blazing silver eyes. Dante. The fourth arrived last, the smallest, with moonlight skin and midnight eyes. Elias, my miracle. For impossible children who represented everything their world said couldn't exist. Then the doors exploded inward. Duke Alaric strode in, flanked by guards, eyes blazing. The truce is over. Those abominations die now. But before violence erupted, the children began to glow. Light filled the chamber, pure, powerful, overwhelming. And in that radiance, everyone saw visions. Futures where vampires and humans lived in balance, where these hybrid children led with wisdom, transforming death into life. They also saw the alternative. Kingdom torn apart, both species destroyed, hope extinguished. When the light faded, Duke Alaric stood frozen. Aurelia reached toward him with tiny fingers and smiled. They're just children, he whispered, hand falling from his sword. Just children. Yes, Seraphine said softly, and they deserve a chance. Alaric knelt slowly. I cannot promise support, but I will give them a chance. I will not kill children. It wasn't victory, but it was enough. Months passed. The children grew with supernatural speed, developing extraordinary abilities. Aurelia sensed emotions. Celine possessed impossible strength. Dante moved through shadows. Elias spoke to animals. For living arguments that hybrid nature was strength, not weakness. Then the Ancient Ones arrived. 50 vampires led by Lord Constantine, older than Rome itself. Your half-breed monsters must die, he declared. They're the future, Seraphine countered. First vampires born in 3,000 years. You're terrified because they prove vampires aren't apex predators, just evolutionary dead ends. Constantine's hand closed around her throat. Choose your next words carefully. I choose truth, she said calmly. My children represent everything you've denied. That we were human once. That we lost something. That immortality isn't the same as life. Then Aurelia began to sing. Not words, just pure, heartbreaking sound that resonated with lost humanity. Her siblings joined, for voices singing life into a hall of death. Constantine's hand dropped. They're just children. Yes, Seraphine agreed. I won't kill them. Not today. He turned away. But others will come. Then we'll be ready. The children have become everything Seraphine hoped. Bridges between worlds, not weapons. Aurelia the diplomat. Celine the warrior. Dante the scholar. Elias the dreamer. The kingdom had stabilized. Most accepted them. Some still muttered about abominations. But the children proved themselves repeatedly. On the balcony one evening, Marcus and Seraphine watched their children play below. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked, Everything you risked? Seraphine thought of 2 centuries of mockery, of being called broken and incomplete. Never, she said firmly. They mocked my infertility for 200 years. But I wasn't infertile, I was waiting. For the right person, the right moment, the right impossible miracle. They're going to change everything. They already have. Below, the 4 impossible children played, their laughter echoing through gardens that had known only silence for centuries. For children born from love between death and life, carrying in their veins a future of both species. The mockery had ended the moment they drew breath, and the revolution had only just begun.